Brutalism is another post-war architectural idea, and it's going to be something that grows out of the shortages post-World War II in housing and in materials, primarily in Europe. In order to construct housing units quickly, they would use roughly cast concrete, which employed that exposed structural material and the methods of construction. So they're exposing the construction materials and the methods. They're creating something that is more functional than it is beautiful oftentimes. And here, my example is, of course, Winter Hall at UW-Whitewater, which is a classic brutalist structure. You can still see where they use the plywood forms. Of course, the grain of the plywood is still there. We can see how they construct it, and you get the sense of something that needed to go up quickly, that needed to be primarily functional. Now, brutalist buildings were heavy in appearance, quickly constructed of inexpensive precast or poured concrete, and featured unfinished surfaces. It's currently more frequently used for less obvious structures such as sewage treatment plants and parking garages, or the Humanities Building at UW-Madison is another example, where we have the form of construction open to the elements. In more classical forms, this would all be covered. There would be a facade covering it, so we couldn't tell what was going on and how the building was constructed. Now, one of the great examples of this is going to be Notre Dame de Haut, and this is built by a French architect by the name of Le Corbusier. And what he's doing, and I've brought this up in the past as modernist in the sense that it fits the landscape. But what he's doing is he's using concrete construction. It's a heavy concrete construction. It gives the sense of a massive bunker. But interestingly, when you get inside, it has the sense of a very interesting religious space. This is where some of that sculpture, some of that whimsy starts to come in, whereas the outside obviously has the whimsical lines. It's very curvilinear, very interesting, very different from the rectangles of more international style construction. Inside, everything is going to be sort of mythical. In fact, we have this interesting space between the roof and the walls that gives a halo effect around the chapel. Same thing around this large, what appears to be a concrete column, but of course we know that that's not necessary because these walls are all very thick concrete and more than capable of supporting themselves. So it gives it the sense of a miracle on earth. Same with the deep set windows, and the sun shines directly into those, shining the colored light across the surface. So it gets across that sense of miracle that we saw with the cathedrals of the Gothic, and we're seeing again with this chapel. We also see the National Theatre in London, and this is again built in raw concrete. It's using the forms and materials. It's very basic, very postmodern in that you can pick out the different elements that they've built with. We have a lot of horizontal lines. We can see that prairie style, that Frank Lloyd Wright sort of impact on this piece or influence on this piece. We have the vertical, and we have those steps building up from a very broad base to a much more narrow tower at the top. It's actually very reminiscent of the ziggurats of the ancient Near East. Here's the ziggurat, or reconstruction of the ziggurat of Ur, and you get that sense of the different levels and staircases, the horizontal elements standing out, and the use of the materials. In the case of the ziggurat, it would be mud brick. Here it's concrete, standing out to the viewer. And it's really unapologetic in the way that it's doing that. And it's classically brutalist for that reason. It's not giving us an aesthetic in the sense of whatever the surface treatment is. It is, however, using aesthetics to determine the overall form and shape of the structure, kind of mixing postmodern ideas along with the functional modernist perspective.